Hi, my name is Victor Anchundia, and I will be talking how the genre of comedy has evolved or changed throughout history. Let's begin with what can be argued to be the first type of comedy, and I think that's slapstick humor. It was the first type of comedy shown on TV due to the lack of speech, and it's also the type of comedy kings would have jokers do back in the Middle Ages for comedy. Though verbal jokes were a thing, they were hardly considered comedy, but more of an entertaining anecdote, according to many users on Reddit that have read these type of things. So up until the late 20s, the real comedy known was slapstick, which is just a funny action such as a soft injury or a silly reaction. And we've seen this in the many films that were shown to us in this month's class in Full Sail. Then came the 30s. From that point on, funny anecdotes were considered jokes, but they were a lot different to the comedy that we're used to seeing nowadays. And I think because everything was new back then, the nothing could really be a cliche. So the typical lines that I feel like many of us would find expected, outdated, or even cringy at times, were extremely hilarious in the old films. So from the movies that I've seen from the 30s till probably the late 70s, comedy was pretty much the same thing. It went along on the same flow, and many movies had the same jokes and humor, which got a little boring and out of style. The decade of the 80s introduced a lot of different styles of movies. One of my personal favorites, Airplane. It was pure comedy in the stupidest way I could possibly describe it, and this sort of ridicule style of movie went on to be a new style of comedy movies. And though Airplanes wasn't really a parody of anything, I really do believe that this is where the style of a parody was born. Ferris Bueller's Day Off and The Breakfast Club were both introduced in the 80s, and I mention these movies because I feel like these movies also brought in a new style of comedy. Maybe not completely, but there were new jokes and a different kind of slapstick, in my opinion. One of them being the non cliche running around the corner of the hallway and almost like sliding or falling. The 90s, I feel, brought a different vibe, but I can't really describe it. Home Alone, Friday, starting an Ice Cube, Clueless, and my favorite movie of all time, Pretty Woman. All these four movies brought in new things to the decade. One was a child being left alone acting like Chuck Norris or the manliest man alive. A point of view of a rich girl's life. Two men smoking, trying to score with a girl. And a man falling in love with a prostitute. So yeah, I'd say it was pretty different from the decades before. The vibe of the movies from the 90s are what I think inspired the movies after the 2000s because comedy took a whole new turn. And the new funny was sexual moments gone wrong or something dirty. And a big example of that is American Pie. The 2000 and 2010 showed a lot of new movies, a ton, but I feel like some, though were extremely funny and had original content, all were a combination of all previous decades, especially from the 80s and the 90s, with the exclusion of the remakes such as Freak Friday, The Parent Trap, and among many others that were from earlier decades. What's next now that we've entered a new decade is yet to be seen. With the new norm that the stereotypical or cruel jokes shouldn't be allowed to say at all, comedy may be forced to take a change. But that's another topic. Thank you for listening. This has been your host, Victor Anchundia.